Will Iran launch a full-scale attack if the negotiations with the United States get stuck? Iran is not waiting for an agreement. The preparations for the next round of fighting are already underway. The Gulf is preparing for escalation with Iran. Will the United States win the war in Iran? And right now, the United States is threatening to annex the Strait of Hormuz. The Memorandum of Understandings, the B-2 bombers, and Trump's new threats, the American president is firing back at Iran, while in Washington, officials are discussing the possibility of a nuclear attack on Iran. And Iran has seized an oil tanker belonging to the United Arab Emirates in the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran is setting an ultimatum and announcing that it will move to an offensive policy. And President Trump is revealing a secret channel with the Revolutionary Guards. While the United States is projecting optimism from the talks and the negotiations, Iran does not recognize such talks and calls them fantasy. And why did President Trump threaten to bomb Oman to pieces? Iran's Revolutionary Guards are revealing that they are managing the front in Lebanon against Israel. I'm Shoshani, joined today by Ashlea, and we are boots on the ground. We bring you the truth about what's happening in Israel and the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Today is August 18th. Let's get started. The ceasefire between the United States and Iran, signed on June the 17th, left little room for idleness. Tehran was supposed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and then negotiate over its nuclear program. Washington promised, among other things, sanction waivers on oil and access to several $billion in frozen assets. But behind the scenes, hardliners inside the Iranian regime use the calm to prepare for what comes next. The United States is now replacing the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, which spent more than 200 days in combat zone, with the USS George Washington. Aircraft from the Lincoln carried out more than 10,000 sorties during the campaign. And at the same time, reports describe the difficulties created by the long deployment for the crew. Beyond the need to refresh the forces, the replacement allows Washington to preserve a significant naval and air presence in the region going forward, while the blockade on Iran and the diplomatic efforts continue. One of the main aircraft carriers in the war against Iran is ending an especially long deployment, but American power in the region is not disappearing. Another aircraft carrier is arriving in its place. The USS George Washington is replacing the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Middle East, in a move that allows the U.S. Navy to refresh its personnel while maintaining the operational capability required to continue pressure on Iran. And meanwhile, Iran opened fire at vessels escorted by the United States. Washington was surprised. Tehran, it seems, much less so. Iran's military seized a tanker owned by the United Arab Emirates, which crossed the Strait of Hormuz without required coordination by the Iranians. El Arabiya also published details of the incident and reported that the seizure took place near the Iranian island of Qeshm. Between the nuclear file and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, it appears that the United States and Iran have another disagreement, whether they are even holding contacts and connections at all. While Trump's envoy claims the best talks took place recently, Iran rejects that entirely and even says Trump is hallucinating. Illusions is what they say. President Donald Trump spoke with reporters this evening and addressed the economic pressure that he says the United States is applying to Iran. Trump said that the naval blockade we imposed was very effective. Now millions of barrels of oil a week are being moved out of Hormuz, end quote. The president added, I want an agreement with Iran for one reason, to prevent it from obtaining nuclear weapons. But Iran is not going to sign the agreement that I see as necessary. In response to the president's statement that he will soon declare the Strait of Hormuz American territory, a senior Iranian official said that we will increase tensions in the strait and in the region if diplomacy fails. The spokesman for the Revolutionary Guards also joined the wave of threats. Trump has only one path before him: to recognize defeat and fulfill Iran's conditions. It's important to understand something about Iran's Revolutionary Guards. The hardliners in the regime never saw the agreement as the beginning of the end. Their interpretation was exactly the opposite. From their perspective, the agreement would have served the United States and Israel by reducing pressure on the global economy, by buying time and then preparing for a larger attack. A Kuwaiti source close to the government said that Iran's demands and extreme statements show that it is heading for escalation. We're consulting on this matter with our allies and with the other Gulf states. Oman, in addition to mediating between the United States and Iran, is also holding parallel negotiations with Iran to establish safe passage for ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, according to reports, Iran wants to charge a fee for safe passage through the strait after a transition period. When the President of the United States was asked about the negotiations between Oman and Iran, President Donald Trump told Fox News, "If Oman makes a separate deal with Iran over control of the Strait of Hormuz, we will bomb them to pieces." That's a direct quote. The United States rejects any agreement that involves Iran collecting fees and has also signaled that it will not remove the blockade on Iranian ports unless Iran gives up this demand. Against the background of Israel's assessment that Tehran may try to expand the regional confrontation, a senior Iranian official said this afternoon that Iran has decided to change its policy from defensive to fully offensive. Now, according to him, all Iranian bodies will be prepared for an escalation of tensions in the Strait of Hormuz and in the region if diplomatic efforts fail. Now look, Iran's Revolutionary Guards used the 2 months that followed to prepare for a broader confrontation. And in diplomacy, every side reads the fine print. In this case, it seems that the two capitals were not even reading the same document. Iran is organizing for a wider war. The change happened first inside the military mechanism. The Revolutionary Guards received greater control over the regular army, while several veterans of the Iran-Iraq War returned to key positions. Mohsen Rezai, who commanded the Revolutionary Guards in the 1980s, was appointed Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. Hossein Taib, identified with the suppression of the 2009 protest, was returned to lead the Basij with a mission of turning it into a local intelligence network. The Revolutionary Guards also worked with their regional allies. Advisors were sent to Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon. Communications intercepted by Arab intelligence services, according to the report, point to discussions with the Houthis and with Iraqi militias about increasing attacks. And in Yemen, the Revolutionary Guards allegedly supervised the deployment of missiles and drone launchers facing the Red Sea, while also providing intelligence and target lists, including Saudi ports and energy facilities. In late July, the Houthis attacked Yemeni forces backed by Riyadh and announced the closure of the Bab el-Mandab Strait to Saudi interest. At the same time, Saudi Arabia accused pro-Iranian militias in Iraq of launching drones at its oil facilities. Now, according to L'Express Tehran, Tehran also sent several Gulf states lists of energy facilities that could be destroyed if the United States attacks similar facilities in Iran. Now, at the same time, missile and drone production was accelerated, the counterintelligence system was strengthened, and the chain of command was tightened. The new commander of the Revolutionary Guards, Ahmed Wadahi, or Wadihi, depends how you pronounce it, was given the mission of carrying out powerful offensive operations against the enemy. Already the next day, his advisor, Mohammad Reza Naqvi, explained that such operations must be allowed even on enemy territory. Now, looking ahead, the options being examined are even more provocative. Preemptive attacks, sabotage of internet cables in the Gulf, destabilizing Bahrain or Kuwait, and even ground incursions into Kuwait. Now, in May, Kuwaiti authorities announced that they had intercepted 6 Revolutionary Guards members who arrived on an island aboard a rented fishing boat. These preparations don't erase Iran's weaknesses. American and Israeli strikes caused significant damage to the country's military capabilities and economy, while President Masoud Pezeshkian and other officials considered more pragmatic are pushing for an agreement that could ease the sanctions. But according to Israeli officials, the infrastructure is being repaired faster than expected, and Iran still has enough means to threaten American bases, ships, and several energy facilities in the Gulf. Washington is waiting for the sanctions and the naval blockade to return Tehran to a more flexible position. But we in the Middle East know the war is not over. It is only beginning. Iran is now threatening a timed and precise military attack against the American naval blockade and claims it is moving from a defensive position to an offensive one. And meanwhile, the talks on disarming the Hamas terror organization in Gaza are moving forward. Yesterday, after more than 4 hours, the meeting between Jared Kushner, Nikolai Meladanov, Tony Blair, members of the Peace Council, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu came to an end. At the conclusion of the meeting, several understandings were reached regarding the demilitarization of the Hamas terror organization and the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. During the talks, Netanyahu told his guests that the IDF will not withdraw at this stage from the Yellow Line and that Israel does not intend to change its targeted elimination policy. It was agreed in the meeting that no reconstruction will take place in the Strip before Hamas is disarmed throughout its entire territory. The sources also said that the Peace Council informed Netanyahu that Hamas had committed to fully disarming and immediately stopping all military activity in the Strip, including rearming and digging tunnels. Now, according to sources in the Peace Council, this is a more explicit and broader commitment than what had been discussed so far as part of the contacts to implement President Donald Trump's plan. Now, as you can see, there's a lot ahead of us. Let's dive into the details. Once again, I'm Mati Shoshani. Today, Yair Pinto is not with us, but we are joined by Ashlea, Alex, and we are boots on the ground. We bring you the truth about what's happening in Israel and about the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. But before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click the subscribe button. And most importantly, don't forget to find me, Mati Shoshani, and Yair Pinto on social media to get our firsthand perspective on what it's like to live in Israel under war. Now, for generations, Israel's paratroopers have stood on the front lines defending the people of Israel, the land of Israel, and the home God promised to his people. And even now, as the war continues, Israel's paratroopers are still fighting on multiple fronts. They leave behind wives, children, and families and step forward to protect the nation. Every paratrooper needs to know a single thing, that if the worst should happen, his wife and children will not be left alone. That's why the Paratroopers Families Fund exists, known in Hebrew as Dad's Friends. For more than 50 years, this fund has provided long-term ongoing support for the widows and orphans of fallen paratroopers. Not one-time help, but a standing commitment. Each family is assigned a personal liaison from the brigade. Widows and children take part in retreats, trips, and activities throughout the year, and children are guided from childhood into their own military service and even beyond. This is not a memorial organization. It is an organization of life, responsibility, love, and continued care for those left behind. Your help is needed now. Everyone who serves in this fund is a volunteer. Not a single person draws a salary. Your donation helps continue real, personal support for a child who lost his father and for a widow carrying the home alone. This is a practical way to stand with the people of Israel, to stand with their soldiers, and to stand with the widows and orphans of those who gave their lives for this land. Donate now to the Paratroopers Family Fund at idfairborne.org. Again, that's idfairborne.org. Help the fund continue giving these widows and children community, comfort, hope, and support, not just today, but for years to come. Let's get back to the news. The first thing to understand about the tanker incident near Qeshm Island is that this is not another drone strike. Iranian state-linked media says forces seized an Emirati-owned tanker after accusing it of crossing the Strait of Hormuz without the required coordination with Iran. The vessel's name and cargo have not been independently confirmed, and that matters. But if the seizure is confirmed, Iran has crossed from threatening commercial traffic to physically taking custody of a ship. So what happens when Tehran decides that a commercial vessel needs Iranian permission simply to move through an international waterway? The location tells part of the story. Qeshm sits directly beside the narrow shipping lanes of Hormuz. A boarding of seizure gives Iran several options at once: to stop a ship, to inspect it, to redirect it, to hold the crew, or use the incident to demonstrate that Tehran intends to enforce its own rules at sea. That's a different level of coercion from firing a drone and letting the vessel continue. Over the last several days, Emirati-operated tankers have already been hit while trying to transit the strait. Now, Iranian media is presenting detention itself as an enforcement tool tied to permits, approved routes, and possible transit fees. In practical military terms, that means every captain approaching Hormuz has to calculate not only the risk of being struck, but also the risk of being boarded. Tehran is also making clear that it wants this pressure to extend outside of the water. A senior Iranian official says the country has decided to move from a defensive policy posture to a fully offensive one if diplomacy fails. The warning includes a new deadline for several weeks for Washington to implement what Tehran says were the commitments in the June memorandum. Iran's Khatem el-Annabiya central headquarters says escalation options in Hormuz are prepared for immediate use and that the era of absorbing pressure is fully over. That important word here is not offensive. Iran has attacked before. The important point is where Tehran wants the next pressure point to appear. Iranian hardliners spent the pause rebuilding missile and drone production, tightening Revolutionary Guard influence over the regular military, and preparing allied forces across the region. Their contingency planning has included Saudi energy infrastructure, ports, undersea communication cables, unrest in Gulf states, and possible raids into Kuwait. A Kuwaiti figure close to the government says the country is preparing for the possibility of high-intensity war and is consulting allies in other Gulf states. That concern is not theoretical after repeated Iranian threats against energy infrastructure and American military facilities across the Gulf. Lebanon is another part of that map. Iranian parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf now says publicly that he remains in direct contact with Hezbollah commanders and fighters on the front. Iran's armed forces chief, Amir Khatami, has also warned that Tehran will not accept a major escalation against Hezbollah while the confrontation with the United States continues. For Israel, that statement removes some of the ambiguity. Iran is not describing Hezbollah as an independent Lebanese actor that happens to share its ideology. Senior Iranian officials are openly presenting the Northern Front as part of their own regional struggle. That matters while Israel continues striking Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon, including the Ali Tahir Ridge area, where underground positions have become a central point of pressure. If Iran wants to move from defensive to offensive, Lebanon gives it a point or place where pressure can be applied without launching every weapon directly from Iranian territory. Then came another warning from northern Iraq. Kurdish counterterrorism authorities said 2 explosive drones, identified as Hadid 110s, targeted the office and residence of Kurdistan Regional Government Prime Minister Masroor Barzani in Erbil. No casualties were reported. Iraqi Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein demanded clarification from Tehran, while Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said he has seen no evidence that the attack came from Iranian territory and called the incident suspicious. The timing is especially sensitive because Kurdish leaders have also been used as intermediaries between Washington and Iranian power centers. Even without a proven Iranian order behind the Erbil attack, the incident shows how exposed that channel has become. One drone incident in Erbil, a seized tanker near Qeshm, pressure on Hezbollah's front in Lebanon, and warnings from Kuwait may look like separate stories. But operationally, they form the same problem. The battlefield is spreading into the spaces around Iran, where American partners, shipping routes, and regional intermediaries are easier to pressure than the continental United States. Before we continue, help us carry first-hand reporting from Israel beyond the headlines. Guys, like this report, share it, and subscribe to Boots on the Ground so you don't miss the next turn in this rapidly developing war. What you see on YouTube is only a small part of the story. To get closer to our first-hand reporting, behind-the-scenes moments, and stories of faith, resilience, and hope from Israel, visit tbn.org/journeys/boots. You can also text the word boots to 316-316 in North America to receive direct updates from TBN Israel. Now, when Ashlea and I report from this region, our goal is to help you understand not only what happened, but why the next move may already be forming on the ground. There's one more military detail worth watching before I hand this over to Ashlea. The United States is rotating the USS George Washington towards the Middle East to relieve the USS Abraham Lincoln. The Lincoln's overall deployment has lasted over 260 days, including more than 240 uninterrupted days at sea. Its carrier strike group says it has conducted about 10,000 aircraft flights and expended roughly 1.5 million pounds of ordnance. That rotation keeps American air power in the region, but it also creates a strategic trade-off. Moving the George Washington from the Pacific leaves the United States temporarily without an aircraft carrier in the Western Pacific at a time when Washington is also watching China and North Korea. That's where this stops being only a Middle East military story. Now, Ashlea, let's hand it over to you.
Thanks, Matty. Because the next part of this confrontation is being fought with presidential statements, deadlines, sanctions, alliance politics, and markets just as much as with drones and aircraft. President Donald Trump is now presenting the Strait of Hormuz as evidence that his pressure campaign is working. He says the American naval blockade is highly effective, claims the United States is moving millions of barrels of oil through the strait each week, and has repeated the idea of declaring Hormuz American territory. That language is extraordinary. It is also part of a bargaining strategy that has become increasingly difficult to separate from the military campaign. Trump says he wants to deal with Iran for one central reason: to prevent Tehran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. He argues that previous American B-2 strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities have already pushed that threat further into the future. At the same time, he says Iran wants an agreement, but not the agreement he considers necessary. Trump has also made his military position unusually explicit. He says that if major fighting resumes, the United States would lead the campaign and Israel would support it. Tehran's answer is almost a mirror image. Iran says the 60-day period that began with the June 17th memorandum expired without the United States fulfilling its commitments. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Bagay argues that there is nothing to extend because, in Tehran's view, the period was never a formal 60-day ceasefire. It was supposed to be a negotiating window. And Iran says serious negotiations never truly began. The result is a strange diplomatic situation. Washington says contacts are active and potentially productive, while Tehran says the public description of those contacts is fantasy. Jared Kushner has said the United States is speaking with different parts of the Iranian system and described recent contacts in unusually positive terms. Trump has also said Washington has back-channeled to the Revolutionary Guards. The Revolutionary Guards deny that direct talks are taking place. Their spokesman, Hossein Mohavi, says there are no negotiations between senior Guard officials and the Americans. Iranian officials insist that diplomatic authority belongs to other state institutions, while the Revolutionary Guards are focused on the military fight. Both descriptions can contain part of the truth without describing the same process. Earlier in the war, Washington used Kurdish President Nechuvan Barzani as an intermediary to pass messages towards senior Revolutionary Guard commander Ahmad Vahidi. A mediated channel is not the same thing as a formal negotiation. That distinction helps explain why the White House can talk about communication while Iranian officials deny sitting across a table from American representatives. But the contradiction is politically useful to both sides. Trump can show that pressure has produced contact. Tehran can insist it has not surrendered, especially while Iranian commanders are telling their own public that the United States has been defeated. Now, at Oman. Oman has been trying to negotiate a practical arrangement with Iran for safer commercial passage through Hormuz. The discussion includes designated shipping routes, coordination with Tehran, and according to several reports, the possibility that Iran would charge fees or require permits for passage after a transition period. Washington rejects any arrangement that effectively recognizes an Iranian right to tax or license international shipping through the strait. Trump's response went much further than diplomatic criticism. He threatened Oman with military action if it makes a separate arrangement with Iran that, in his view, gets in the way of the American strategy. That threat is now creating a debate inside the United States as well. Senator Tim Kaine has moved to challenge the possibility of military action against Oman through a war powers measure, arguing that the president cannot simply expand the conflict to another country without congressional authorization. So while Oman is trying to act as a mediator, it's now being squeezed by both sides. Iran wants recognition of its authority in Hormuz, and Washington is warning Muscat not to legitimize that claim. This is exactly why the expiration of the June framework matters. The original understanding was supposed to create time for several linked problems to be resolved: the nuclear issue, sanctions relief, frozen Iranian assets, freedom of navigation through Hormuz, and the broader regional war. Instead, the deadline arrived with the central disputes still open. Iran now says it is giving Washington several more weeks to implement its interpretation of the memorandum. Trump says he's in no hurry and has dismissed the original deadline as irrelevant. He has also insisted that American midterm elections are not driving his timetable. Those are not negotiating positions moving toward each other. They are competing clocks. And markets are beginning to price the risk that neither side backs down. Government borrowing costs across several major economies rose sharply on August 17th, as investors worried that the Iran war could keep energy prices elevated and force central banks to maintain tighter monetary policy. France's 30-year government bond yield climbed to roughly 4.86%, its highest level since 2008. Germany's equivalent borrowing costs reached levels not seen since 2011. The US 30-year Treasury yield moved above 5.2%, while Japan's 10-year yield reached its highest level in about 3 decades. That may sound far removed from a tanker near Qeshm Island, but the connection is direct. When energy routes become less reliable, oil and shipping costs can rise. Higher energy costs feed inflation. Higher inflation makes central banks more reluctant to cut interest rates, and investors then demand higher returns to lend money to governments. In other words, the confrontation in Hormuz is now reaching mortgage markets, government budgets, and central bank decisions far outside the Middle East. Trump argues that the blockade is forcing Iran toward economic collapse. He has claimed Iranian inflation is around 300%. That figure is the president's claim, not an independently established current inflation reading. But sanctions, restricted oil exports, and the blockade are clearly creating severe economic pressure on Iran. Tehran's hardliners appear to be betting that economic pain can be transferred outward. If Iran can keep enough risk around Hormuz, the Red Sea, Gulf energy facilities, and American bases, the cost of continuing the war rises for Washington's partners as well. That is why Gulf governments are increasingly trying to build room for independent diplomacy rather than simply waiting for Washington and Tehran to decide the outcome. The movement of the USS George Washington shows the same problem from another direction. Militarily, the carrier rotation preserves American combat power in the Middle East. Geopolitically, it pulls one of the most visible symbols of US deterrence away from the Western Pacific. American allies in Asia are watching that closely. The Iran war was supposed to be one theater. It's now consuming assets that Washington also uses to deter China and reassure Japan, South Korea, and other partners. Trump has pushed back against concerns that the United States is running short of weapons, saying what America has used so far is peanuts. But the debate is no longer only about the number of bombs in storage. The harder question is how many simultaneous commitments the United States can sustain without creating openings somewhere else. That question is also shaping the politics of the Gulf. Kuwait is preparing for a possible high-intensity conflict. The UAE has seen its commercial ships attacked. Qatar and Pakistan are exchanging messages between Washington and Tehran. Oman is negotiating over shipping while being threatened by the White House. Saudi Arabia is protecting energy infrastructure and looking for ways to reduce its exposure to a war it does not control. This does not mean America's alliances are collapsing. It means regional governments are hedging. They want US protection, but they also want channels to Tehran. They want Hormuz open, but they do not want to become the battlefield used to force it open. And then there's Gaza, where the same White House is trying to manage another politically explosive file. Kushner met Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu while pressing a 15-point framework built around Hamas disarmament, technocratic governance, and a new political arrangement for the Strip. Trump says Hamas has agreed to give up its weapons and has publicly urged Israel not to attack if that commitment is real. Israel remains focused on the practical definition of disarmament: who collects the weapons, who destroys military infrastructure, what territory the IDF leaves, and who enforces the agreement when the cameras are gone. That matters to the Iran story because Washington is attempting to negotiate several connected fronts at once. Iran links its regional position to Hezbollah and the Gulf. The White House is simultaneously dealing with Israel, Hamas, Arab mediators, maritime security, and Tehran's nuclear program. Every concession in one arena can be interpreted as leverage in another. The result is a diplomatic battlefield with almost as many moving parts as the military one. Matti, back to you.
The pressure is now moving in both directions. Iran is trying to push the cost of this war into the Gulf and beyond, while the United States is using blockade, military power, and economic pressure to force Tehran back towards a deal. Will the next decisive move be a negotiated opening of Hormuz, or the military action that convinces both sides that the pause is over? Guys, keep spreading the truth, follow us, and most importantly, don't forget to click the subscribe button so that you stay tuned into the truth in real time and never miss boots on the ground. Keep looking for me, Matti Shoshani, Yair Pinto, and Ashlea Alex on social media to see life in Israel through our eyes. And now I want to remind you, as always, to pray for the people of Israel. Join me, guys, in praying for our men and women in arms in the Israeli army, for the men and women of the American armed forces who have been fighting this ongoing long war in the Middle East, and for our leadership, for President Trump, for Prime Minister Netanyahu, for your leader, wherever it is you live in the world. And above all, if confused, if at doubt, if lacking words, pray for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven and for his supernatural peace to reside over his city, the city where I stand, the eternal city of Jerusalem. Be blessed, guys, and I'll see you all the next time.